Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Hi, Squale Siam Nasietya. Ainai Squalawan Kawana Silim Nala. We respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Kawatsan people. I'll give you regrets from Trustee Thorne, who's unavailable this evening, and move to adoption of the agenda. But before we do that, could I add agenda item 10.2, which is the board ad hoc committee, and then ask for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Candace, I didn't hear what you said. There was a lot of background noise. What are you adding, please?
Okay. Well, my call to order. Yes. Okay. So adoption of the agenda. I'm adding one item, 10.2, which is the board ad hoc committee on COVID-19. And then asking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Trustee Crofts, seconded by Trustee Kemmler. All those in favor? Motion carries. Moving to the minutes of December 7th, 2021 open board meeting, asking for a motion to adopt the minutes. Moved by Trustee Crofts, seconded by Trustee Kemmler. All those in favor? Motion carries. Moving through recognition and delegations to the report of the closed meeting. Mr. Sandquist.
Thank you, Chair. The board met in closed session just prior to this open meeting. The business was concluded. They reviewed posting results, contract updates, and changes to legislation.
Thank you. Moving to item 6, old business, the action list. Is there anything that staff wishes to update us on? Or are there any questions from trustees? Perhaps you could put that up, Mr. Sandquist?
Yes.
Superintendent.
I just want to make a comment on one of the action items with regard to the early learning action plan. It is on the agenda at a later time this afternoon.
Thank you. Anything from you, Mr. Sandquist?
Just bringing it up. There it is. Don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Any questions from trustees? Okay, moving on to chair of the board. And the first is item 7.1.1, the Municipality of North Cowichan draft official community plan. And as you know, we did put in a response, and key issues were the fact that elementary schools were filling due to our enrollment and future enrollment, that our concerns are primarily around Maple Bay, Berkey's Corner, and Bell McKinnon, while future growth also may take us to Crofton and Chemainus. We don't see a need in the secondary schools for another secondary. It's the elementary that we are having difficulty coping with. We advise them that we're currently undertaking a update of our long-range facilities plan and working towards a bylaw that will require the collection of school site acquisition charges. We confirmed that many of the themes in their draft OCP align with our board's own strategic priorities, and we thank them for the partnership that we have and suggested that we continue to work collectively together. Any questions on that? Okay, moving to 7.1.2, which is the Cowichan Secondary School replacement groundbreaking and public meeting. They were held on December the 14th, and many of you were able to attend. Thank you for that. At the groundbreaking, you know that we had the Right Honorable Jennifer Whiteside, who is the Minister of Education, as well as Councillor of Cowichan Tribes, Stephanie Atleo. And between the three of us, we spoke and then helped to officially break the ground at the site of the new school. And we had already done our ceremony to bless the land, so this started the official start to the construction for the new school. And then we held the public meeting in the evening, and the HCMA architects, as well as Urban One, as well as our own Tom Sparrow, presented the future design of the building, and I think it was very well received. Although there was not as large as an attendance as we had hoped, and we suggest that it was a result of being so close to the Christmas break. Anything on that one? Okay, so 7.1.3, Minister Whitehead's visit. Prior to the groundbreaking, she and I attended Mill Bay Nature School for 8:30 to 10:30 in the morning.
Good afternoon.
Sorry. And we sat outside in a pleasant cold for 2 hours when the children and staff and parents were able to talk about their school. And she seemed most keen on this unique model and how everyone was so supportive of it. After that, she went to Nourish Cowichan, and I'm sure Fatima da Silva gave her an excellent review of the program that is within our district. And then, of course, she came back to the groundbreaking. So I think it was a really good day for her. She seemed very pleased, and the presentation of the drum to her was certainly a highlight at the end of the groundbreaking ceremony. The board retreat follow-up, item 7.1.4. Next week, we get to look at our target areas of improvement that we identified as a board at our retreat, and look at a plan for trustee professional development from there. So that will be at board planning next week. Okay, and moving on to item 8, Superintendent of Schools.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just start with a staffing update. I would like to share with the board that we went through a process with regard to a vice principal eligibility pool. And so we have shortlisted, we've interviewed candidates, and we have hired a number of vice principals to our pool. And I do want to welcome 2 individuals, Madeline Rochelet. She is a teacher at École Prévost who has been assigned at a temporary basis to Discovery Elementary. And we've also welcomed in Kelly Gervin, who is a teacher at Alexander Elementary presently, and she has been also taken on an elementary temporary position at Alexander. And so in the near future, we will be announcing those additional successful candidates to our pool. So that will happen in the very near future. Secondly, I also want to share with the board that an associate superintendent posting will be coming out as soon as January the 7th. We have an impending retirement that will be occurring at the latter half of this year. And so that particular posting will be going out as of January the 7th and closing on January the 28th. Thirdly, I'd like to share that we have a successful candidate for the Student Information System Manager position. A posting went out on December the 1st. It closed on December the 13th. Interviews were held, and we would like to welcome Stacey Berry to the position of SIS Manager, and she will be starting on January the 18th. So those would be my staffing updates. So now I'd like to move on to 8.2 with regard to kindergarten registration. And so as I shared with the board in early December at the board meeting, all children 5 years of age on or before December the 31st may register for kindergarten process. So French Immersion and Mill Bay, they happen to be our district programs. And so registration will take place at those schools and Mill Bay Nature School during the regular office hours of January the 24th through the 28th. And this does include siblings of current students, and all late applicants will also be waitlisted. So just a point of note. And also with regard to catchment schools, those registrations will take place after those district program registrations, and it will occur from January 31st through to February the 4th. Kindergarten registrations will be accepted from families living within a school's catchment area and from families whose older children will be continuing at the school with an out of catchment approval. And of course, any family wishing to register their child in a different school may apply to do so using an out of catchment request form available at their school. And that's per our admin procedure number 301. And then of course, if the requested spaces for French Immersion elementary schools, which happen at École Mount Prevost, as well as École Cobble Hill and Mill Bay Nature School are oversubscribed, placement will be determined by a district supervised lottery process. And so we've gone through that process for a number of years now. And so it works well, and it allows folks to look at some of those placements at those district schools and then also register at their own school. So if there aren't any questions, I will move on to 8.2.2, which would be the superintendent's update, which is very, very minimal, but there's been a number of things that has transpired over this last couple weeks. So firstly, I'd like to just start by acknowledging payroll, operations, finance, as well as those 12-month employees who do work over the winter break and have done so this past couple weeks. I also want to thank the principals and vice principal who began their work last week, working with the senior team to prepare for the phased-in approach that has occurred with regard to startup. And so I know that without all of those people, that we wouldn't be able to do the work that we are doing in support of our learners. And so with regard to the COVID-19 update, there has been some changes, and those changes were announced by Dr. Bonnie Henry on December the 29th. And it was for a staggered start to school. And the purpose of that was certainly to look at how do we enact and activate the enhanced health and safety protocols that we've had to put in place around the Omicron variant. And so we've certainly offered schooling for those students who may need it, but also for the essential healthcare workers and other supports for our learners who may need to be at school this week, because we know it's very impactful on their learning. But we also know that we will be welcoming all of our students back on January the 10th of next week. And so presently this morning, we do know that all of our schools had a staff meeting with their staff. First thing this morning, they were also meeting with their health and safety site-based committee so that they could begin that work. And so the work will be around how do they promote those enhanced health and safety protocols and plans, but also how do they actually develop plans around the continuity of learning. So we have the senior staff as well as the school-based principals and vice principals working toward what needs to happen this week in the event that there is a functional closure. And so I know that also even this afternoon, there were some updates by Dr. Bonnie Henry with regard to the fact that there may be a concern around our workforce and the number of people who might need to be away in terms of staying home when they are indeed sick. So more work to be done by our school-based personnel in the support of students while we're going through this particular time and the staggered approach. I'd also like to just share with the board that we are still focusing on learning, and we do have the Ignite Sans Bite, and there's going to be 2 sessions that are going to be occurring this coming spring, one on February the 10th, virtually of course, and one on April the 21st. So we look forward to what those learning sessions will be after school for all of our learners across the district, namely our adult learners. And then lastly, I just want to share with the board that I had 2 great school visits. one at Quamachin School and one at Maple Bay in December. A great opportunity to meet with the principal and meet with some of the teachers and really see what's happening at the school site. And if anything gives one joy, is the joy of being at a school and seeing what is happening with our teachers, our support staff, our principals and our vice principals in supporting our kids while they learn, because it is a great place for them to be. And I can't thank all of our staff enough for the work that they do and the supports that they provide for all of our learners. And so that is my update around my report. If there aren't any questions, I'm happy to move on to 8.3, which is our early learning action plan. All right, I'll move on to that, but I'm going to ask for some assistance, and I'm hoping that our Secretary Treasurer can bring up the early learning action plan so that I could review it with the board. All right, well, the Secretary Treasurer is doing that. I'm going to start just with, okay.
Got it. I got it. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Oh, I don't think that's the correct one, Jason, but that's okay. There is a new one that has been attached. So I will maybe.
Okay.
Thank you. But while you're doing that and while you're looking for it, I'll just provide an overview for the board. Firstly, this establishment of action would have come from the board. It was a direction from the board on November the 2nd that the Board of Education Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education direct staff to prepare an action plan to respond to the early learning review by January the 4th, 2022. The background around this report would be that from our strategic plan and a focus around early learning, our intention was to do an early learning review across the community to see what enhancements were needing to take place. So it was driven by the board and the strategic plan around the early learning review. And so here what you're going to find today, and I do know I did send it out to the board late last week, that these actions are building on the many recommendations from the early learning review with some adaptations, revisions, and some omissions based on a rationale. In addition, resources have been identified and a timeline has been established. And lastly, some future considerations as the district moves forward, certainly around the provincial mandate around early learning, that it will certainly be part of the framework for enhancing student learning and how we monitor how well our learners are doing, even our early learners. But at the same time that the district may have to give some future consideration to supporting early learning with a resource such as a district educational lead or administrator as this plan continues to grow and develop. And so I'm happy to, there we are.
Sorry.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. I really appreciate it. And that's our beginning document page. And you can see there's our early learner right there. I just went through page 1 of the overview. But then moving on, I think that what we wanted to do is really look at the recommendations. So if we could turn to recommendation 2, so which is really recommendation 1. So from the early learning review, there was a comment around Strong Start programs and how well do we monitor them with regard to our EDI vulnerability, which is a tool in terms of how well our learners are doing. And it's in 5 particular areas. As we did some further research, were they in the right place? Well, we do believe that they are. But at the same time, our new district goal will include, do they have the reach of our Strong Starts that is providing the services that we want for our families and children. So we've lifted up the recommendation 1. We've made it a district goal to review the reach. You can see that we have some actions. We want to initiate some conversations with ECEs in each of our Strong Start areas to review what does that mean? How do we do that? We also are creating a new early learning ECE Soughton, and that could also help to provide that transition person, that person in between some of our nations, along with our strong starts. So it's definitive actions along with some resources that might be needed. We think we can get there. Who's responsible? And we've identified in each one of these areas who's responsible to doing the work and what's the timeline. And so this is a very ambitious timeline. You can see already that we want those conversations to happen by March. And we also want to be looking at creating this Soughton position that would be an individual who could support our First Nations and our Strong Start ECEs in actually creating the reach that we need in those particular areas. Now, if there's any questions as I move along, I can see all of you. Please raise your hand and I can stop. But I'd like to go on to now recommendation 2 and look at our goal there. So this recommendation was, it may be valuable to review all district early learning program services and initiatives. And I do know that within the early learning review, that there was an appendix with all of the programs across this community related to early learning. And I think that we always got to keep in mind that we are the school district, but many of those programs they don't really belong to us, that they're actually part of community initiatives and their community places. But we do have some places that we can actually look at. And so in this particular goal that we're looking at would be increased targeted supports for the well-being of our early learners in the primary years in the growth areas needed as shown in the EDI, the Early Development Instrument. And so you can see there that in the Cowichan Valley School District, it appears that kindergarten students on the level of physical health and well-being, that we really need to work in that area, that they're not quite ready. And then with regard to emotional maturity, 18% of our little learners are not ready as well, and also around their social competencies. And so if we look at the work that we're already doing, we can look at exploring further partnerships with some of our other community agencies, such as Island Health and our Indigenous health agencies. But also, how do we increase the number of K-3 classrooms that are using CALM? And CALM is a wonderful program that supports social and emotional well-being, as well as supports co-regulation for our kindergarten learners. And so we can certainly look at that. But we also could explore the check. And the check is a universal screen, again, designed by the same designers of the EDI, that's created by HELP, that could be done by parents prior to the entry into kindergarten. So it would complement our EDI kindergarten assessments through the EDI tool, but it also would be something that we could actually explore around check. Now, it does require some resources to actually implement that tool, but it's certainly a way of supporting our early learners who may need those supports early on. So you can see the resources there, who is responsible, and you can also look at the timeline. And so you can see that it's a very, again, ambitious plan in that particular area around that particular goal. And again, so it's a real look at how do we support our early learning community, but again, using assessment tools that have been proven to give us the information and the evidence and the data that we might need to respond. I will move on to page 4. And here you can see that there were 4 recommendations from the early learning review. It was around the early success screen. Maybe we needed to look at something else that was more efficient. It was around the timing of the data collection that we do in terms of providing that information around our learners. It was also around the resources focused on classrooms, or should it only go to schools? And then lastly, a recommendation around moving forward around a literacy plan. So we have bundled all of those things together in our district goal that namely says to develop and adopt a K-12 literacy plan that utilizes efficient screening tools, timely assessment processes, and addresses the needs of priority learners across the district. The reason why we have stated such that each of the recommendations above are already being actioned. So presently, right now, we have a group of primary teachers who are looking at the early success screen and beginning to build a tool that's most workable for them. So it's being co-created under the direction of our district principal. We have also organized the data collection process, and it already starts in the fall. So it's looking at collecting that data from all of our learners in the fall. So that data is available for our teachers so that they can actually take that information, inform the instruction in how they actually need to approach that particular classroom setting and the learners within that classroom. And so you can see there, we have a number of actions already there. I just discussed them, who's responsible and what is the timeline. Moving on to page 5, this is with regard to early identification. And so the district may wish to consider a pilot community-based initiative. And I think that we know that this has great impact overall. And so in our district goal that we want to action would be to support kindergarten student entry through effective transition and support plans for greater success in the primary years. Well, why do we need to do that? Well, we need to understand those learners in advance of them arriving so that we can have appropriate plans in place. What do we need to get there? We certainly need to look at engaging with our early learning partners. We can't do this alone around a universal identification of students' needs prior to the entry into kindergarten. We need to explore ways to work more closely with some of our excellent partners. We've named Clements, House of Friendship, and Indigenous First Nation Health. And we've also looked at how do we enable outreach Soutons to support communication regarding kindergarten transitions and registration. So again, we have who's responsible, and we also have a timeline. And so we really want to set up those meetings by late spring here to discuss possibilities and establish next steps. And we can't do that unless we actually co-create and engage with our partners while doing so. Next page is around a communication and engagement plan. We know that's very relevant and highly, highly important. And so our district goal is to co-create a formal communication and engagement plan with early learning partners. And so how do we do that? We collaboratively work with them. And how do we resource it? We certainly have to do that. And again, what is our timeline? We want to share an initial communication strategy with the board's early learning and daycare committee by March 2022. And then also create and enact the finalized plan by June of 2023. So it's going to take some time, but as all good things do, they take a little bit of time, especially when you're co-creating and you're engaging with other partners. And then on page 7, there were 2 recommendations in the early learning review, and it was around a needs assessment for the early learning framework, and also contributing to professional development with our early learning partners. And so again, here, our district goal would be to ensure the early learning framework is understood and implemented K through grade 3. That's the area that we have a lot of influence on, and to support early learning partners with the implementation of the early learning framework. So you can see the action here would be to co-create a needs assessment survey with early learning partners. Can't do it alone. Create a needs assessment survey to be used with our K through grade 3 teachers so we can get a better understanding of where they are and their knowledge around the ELF. And then, of course, based on the results of the needs assessments, create professional learning plan for each of these groups and how can we bring them together. And often it would be a lot of the same professional learning. And again, who's responsible? We have who's going to take that lead on there. And then also what is the timeline? And so again, we want to look at this for spring of 2022. Again, that's where we are this year, and look at creating this professional learning plan that we can implement in the fall of next year. And then lastly, you can see in maybe a little bit of a wider scope, looking at all of our goals and where they land in terms of a timeline and the work that needs to be done overall. So I'm happy to take any questions, but there's also a motion for the board to consider.
So could we maybe move back to full screen for trustees? Thank you. So any questions or comments to the superintendent? Trustee Kimlin?
I'm really, really impressed. A lot of thought, you can tell, and a lot of planning. It seems very, we're all gonna be working really hard to have this all done by spring of 2022. And I say we kind of loosely, I'm thinking it's quite an accomplishment if we can do all that, but I'm sure excited to see us give it a try.
Thank you. Trustee Hutchins?
Yeah, it's an exceptional, aggressive plan. I agree with Trustee Kumler. Can I ask, can we get a copy sent to us? There was some difficulty reading all that on the screen tonight.
Yes, I will absolutely send that to you.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Well, thank you, Superintendent and your staff and the Early Learning Committee for creating, first of all, the review and then the action plan. I really appreciate the intensity and the inclusive involvement of a number of staff working together, and that I'm sure will be the strength of the plan. So is there a trustee who would like to move the motion to adopt the early learning action plan as presented? Moved by Trustee Groot, seconded by Trustee Croft. Any debate on the motion? All those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Superintendent. Moving to Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you. I have a number of financial items to review with the board this evening, and I'm just going to start with the funding announcement, which was included in the package. The other information was sent out a little bit later on as the agenda went out quite early in the month. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and going to the funding announcement. So this is what it looks like when we receive the updated funding, and we then take this and translate it and compare it to what was expected and anticipated. So where you see it still in yellow is February and May. So those are the components of the funding announcement that we haven't met yet, because we haven't had our February count or our May count. But substantially, the majority of the funding is part of the September account, where we received the regular in-class students, the first count on DL and adult, the majority of the special needs funding, as well as Indigenous education, etc. We then take that and we compare it to our March estimate. And this is where it gets a little more interesting, because in March, we were anticipating an enrollment drop. And in fact, the board had an enrollment increase. So if you look across here, we have the December calculation versus the March estimate. You can see in standard classrooms, there's 374 students difference, and that generates $2.9 million. And as we carry that down, you can see where alternate schools are up by 11 FTE, distributed learning was higher by 27.687 FTE, and the money associated with that. So just based on enrollment-based funding, there's an additional 3.158 million. What did disappear was the enrollment decline supplement of $417,000. So with the original estimate of dropping a certain percentage of students, when you drop below 1%, you get additional funding. So you get $50 on every student below that. So that money then has to be given back. We also had anticipated 12 level 1 special needs students, and we had a funding level of 9, so down by 3, offset by an increase of 18 level 2 and a decrease of 8 level 3. Another area where we had higher than expected students was English language learning, 35 additional FTE and the associated funding difference. And the big one was in Indigenous education, 103 FTE students identifying for a program of studies, at $161,000. Now that's the only money here that's actually targeted. So that has to go into what we call 131, which is the ministry's program numbers. Outside of that, the equity of opportunity supplement went up slightly because it's tied to enrollment. Unique, so our total funding for unique student needs is up by 396,000. With more students, there's more teachers, and the board receives funding to ensure that if your teachers are more expensive than the average in the province, there's funding to offset that increase. So there's no disincentive to hire a more senior teacher than a younger teacher because your funding adjusts for it. So in this case, it went up from 1.2 million to almost 1.4 million. And so that September enrollment brings us in at $3.265 million of additional funding off the grant funding. And that's the bulk of it. You know, what we have coming in February is we're anticipating another 366, and in May, another 181. But the majority of the funding is now in and set and has gone up with the enrollment increase. So I'm going to stop sharing because that was the funding part and see if there's any questions on that part.
Any questions so far, trustees? Nope, please carry on.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to now take you over to the year-end projection, and just need a second here. Okay, got it. And hopefully this is showing up. It's an Excel spreadsheet that was sent out. Just got to move you out of the way. Okay. So when we take that that revenue in, we've adjusted our amended budget now to reflect the additional student numbers. We have made an adjustment, and I'll get through the adjustments on the next presentation, but we've made an adjustment to our international education program. And what we've shown here is 1.8 million. We were originally at 1.5, but year to date, we're at 2 million. So that counts in revenue that would be coming in the second semester. And we're just hedging a little bit, just waiting to see what happens with COVID restrictions and travel with the world. So at this point, we're just suggesting that we're going with a little bit lower budget, but right now in the bank, we have 234,000 more than that. Local education agreement, that I'll show you where that's adjusted. So it's neutral. Miscellaneous revenue, we're up a bit over our budget number. Transportation, we're just up slightly over our budget number, and rentals. And I'll walk through how those numbers have changed as well. Interest revenue, we're pretty much on track. And prior year surplus, I'll do a review of that. But right now, when we look at our projection based on the November 30th numbers for revenue, we're coming in about $277,000 over. And the bulk of that is due to variance in the international student program, which we're just putting in here right now, but not into the budget. On our salaries, we are within $2,000 of our principal, vice principal salaries when we run our projection. Our teachers are incredibly close at 17,000. That makes me a little nervous. But typically as we go through the year, the teachers that come into the system are newer and cost less than the ones that we budgeted for as we have people leave on leaves. We are under budget on education assistance and clerical. That's where the majority of the variances are, and that likely has to do with just the number of weeks that we're budgeting for staff. Under USW salaries, again, also incredibly close. We're at right now projecting being under budget by 13,000 on a $5.6 million budget. Excluded, right now a little bit over 26,000, and then on a casual replacement illness, we're at $92,000 under budget, but that's an area I want to talk about. The reason we're under on casual replacement illness is just really about availability of replacements, and those in particular with QP. So it doesn't mean that absences are less. It just means that we haven't been able to hire enough people to come in and fill those positions. I also think that's one of the areas of the budget where we're going to need to look at, when we do the amended budget, increasing beyond the 3.367 million that's there currently. As we move into the fifth phase of the pandemic, especially with this new variant and the expected absenteeisms levels that are anticipated to increase, we believe that that budget is likely going to need to be increased to be sufficient for the balance of the year. One of the areas where we're seeing a lot of pressure is on long-term leave. So these are individuals who are off with significant illnesses, and those are really hard to predict and budget for, but the numbers are certainly increasing. So we'll be making a recommendation to increase casual replacement illness vacation when we get to the amended budget at BEBC later this month. Benefits, we haven't done any projection work on yet. They should be tracking along with the salaries because those two are related. Looking down at our utilities is another area that we see a significant amount of pressure right now. We spent almost twice the hydro that we would typically spend in the month of November. It was a very cold month. It was also a month where some of our air circulation strategies are energy dependent. So to run an increased airflow and to push air through a more significant filter requires additional energy. When windows are left open for ventilation and doors are left open in schools for ventilation, that requires additional energy. So we're seeing that now reflected, and we think we're going to need to make an adjustment for utilities in the budget as well. But overall, the surplus off the budget that we have is about $714,000 that we're projecting to the end of the year. So that's off the amended budget as it exists today. But we will be making some recommendations for changes. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there's any questions on the projection, and then I'll move to the amended budget updates.
Any questions at this point, trustees? Nope, carry on, Mr. Sandquist.
Thank you. Just going to change my tab. Okay. All right, here's where it gets good. This is how the budget has changed, and it has changed significantly from the budget that was adopted in March. Sorry, it was started to be set last March. It was adopted in May. The main reason, of course, is the provincial grant. I walked through that the grants have gone up. I showed you the change in the grant compared to what we had estimated. It nets out with a few other provincial grants in there, and we see that is going up by about 3.1 million. So we've made an adjustment to the budget right now for that. We've increased ISP from 1.5 to 1.8. We've shown you that the revenue right now is 2. We may have some room there to increase that a little bit later once we get confidence that all the students will come. Local education agreement has gone up, and it offsets with the provincial grant. It's money in that just gets money out of the provincial grant that just gets billed through the nations who the board have local education agreements with. Miscellaneous revenue, which are registration fees for ISP. Generally, they're collected this year for next year. Those are up, as are transportation fees that are collected through the international program are up. Rentals, there's a Charles Hoey lease that's now in place that wasn't anticipated last spring, and that's now increased the rental revenue from $85,000 to $150,000. But on the opposite side of that is interest rates have dropped, and we're going to see a decrease in the investment revenue by about $28,000 we predict. I'll get to the surplus part on the next slide. It's actually good news for the board. Principal, vice principal salaries have shifted. There was an increase that came in late in what was part of this year, wasn't part of last year's budget, but the percentage increase that matched the teachers was now added to the budget. Teacher salaries, we had an increase of approximately 26 FTE. Now they're newer teachers, but it's still a significant amount of additional funding. And those were ones that were part of a simple class size requirements. So you had 400 students. There's a lot of services that come along with that. Education assistants, very, very similar budget as we reconcile it, same as clerical and USW, very, very little change. Then a slight change in excluded salaries. Again, the percentage increase that was put in place for some individuals in July. And then under in-service, it's gone up by $276,000, and that's really due to year-end items that were part of the year-end financial statements that you saw with the auditors at the end of September. So items that are not spent are often carried forward. In this case, that would probably be the majority, that would be the BC Education Plan funding. Benefits go up with wages, and they've gone up at the same percentage. So we just wanted to show you 22.91% of wages, and we were previously at 22.92. So benefits go up. Looking at services and supplies, again, most of these are just coming out of year-end surplus restrictions. Rentals and leases, we had some new Grove lease arrangements that weren't part of the original budget. They're for programs that are on that are off-site, that are run on private property. Supplies has gone up for year-end surplus restrictions and additional allocations to schools for increased enrollment, and then utilities. We've already put $94,000 in, and we're still going way over, and that is for the natural gas rate increase of $1 a gigajoule that came into place in October. Transfers to capital, a couple of these are related to funds that we had in the rollover from the previous year that were for the outdoor classrooms. And then there's a little bit of overage there as well for outdoor classrooms as the federal funding didn't quite cover everything that came in on those projects that came in after July 1st. So that shifts the budget by about 4.3 million and gives the board a balanced budget. Going to the surplus tab, and hopefully you can see this. When the financial statements were presented to the board, there was a $6.5 million surplus, of which 2.3 was used to balance this year's budget originally last May. And then other are the items that were restricted, such as unspent Indigenous education money, unspent supply money, unspent learning resources. At that time, that was 1.7 million. We had a subtotal of 4.1, and the board had 2.4 million left, or 2.55% of budget. That's now shifted. Now the board only needs to draw 1.088 million to balance the budget due to the increases in international, and the increases in the per student funding has been greater than what the expenses are that have gone out, which now leaves a change of 1.253 million to the surplus, which leaves an unallocated surplus of 3.655 at this point. That we'd be proposing drawing down a bit for absenteeism, expected increase in the coming months, utilities because of the cost of heating the schools. We think there is likely going to be a need for some additional, I'll take it off share here, for some additional COVID protocol money. For example, we need to do another order on masks. We're going through those extremely quickly, and the new order has, is suggesting that we use 3-layer versus some of the ones that we've been ordering before. So we'll be looking at, likely coming to the board and asking for some increase in that funding. And there's also an opportunity here with the surplus having gone up to look at funding that software upgrade that the district's going through with SDS differently than what was done at the budget time. So in budget, the board, as a budgeting balancing strategy, we said we could take that from local capital. If we don't have to take it from local capital, that leaves local capital available for portable purchases for future years, which I think would be a good strategy. So we'll make a recommendation around taking that from the surplus as well, which I think in total, that's probably about $500,000 worth of items that we would come to the board and say, we think these would be good adjustments to make to the amended budget when it's adopted. I think that's roughly where we're at. So we're that 1.2 that we've come out ahead. I think if the board agrees to make adjustments to the 4 items I've just suggested, is really about $750,000 out ahead of where we were last spring.
Thank you. That's providing us some good news. Any questions, Trustee Hutchins?
I'd say Happy New Year. Thanks, Jason.
Mm-hmm. Any other trustee who has questions or comments? Okay, so we expect to hear the next at BEBC.
Yeah, we'll have a little bit more there as to how we came up with some of these estimates. And we'll get a little bit closer, I think, on the absenteeism once we see the experience in the first, once we have a full school week next week and can really begin to look at what the impacts are of this variant. My next item then to move to is budget timelines, and my apology with the original one that is included in this package. I made the mistake of assuming that I forgot that the closure week had moved to the second week after rather than the week before. And so I have a date in here that needs to change, and I'll just share and show you what that was. So there is no meeting of the BEBC on March 22nd. So I've combined the March 22nd and the March 29th budget timelines that were originally included in your package, and it's sufficient to see the rest of the schedule will continue on as presented. So we have come up with this draft. I worked with Candace, the board chair, on dates. It got a little more complicated as Easter and the BCSTA AGM, should it proceed, certainly take a big block of time out of the majority, out of the schedule. But we see the schedule bringing us to first and second reading of the budget bylaw by May the 3rd. So I guess mark your calendars. There's a very busy late March and April ahead to come to the balanced budget for the 2022-2023 year.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All right, so we have our work plan cut out for us for this year. So thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Moving to item 10, committees and outside organizations. The first 10.1 is highlights of the December 9th, 2021 DSAC meeting. Trustee Croft.
I'd like to move that the board accepts the highlights from the DSAC meeting in December.
Moved by Trustee Croft. Is there a seconder? Trustee DeGroot. Any debate on the question? All those in favor? Motion carries. Moving to item 10.2, the Board Ad Hoc COVID-19 Transition Committee. And Secretary Treasurer is just going to bring up those minutes. The committee met again on the break on December the 30th, 2021, following the call from the provincial health minister and the government around the phased in return for students this term. So I guess what we want to say is our senior staff had already met, and the principals and vice principals also had met prior to our meeting. So everything was put in place in terms of the communication around what needed to change in our schools, although still a lot of individual decisions had to be made. Perhaps Trustee Kemmler, would you like to review some of the minutes? We haven't had an opportunity to look at these minutes yet, so anything that comes to mind, Trustee Kemmler?
Well, part of the minutes and what we were told is that we will be finding a new way of being informed as to what's going on in our schools, because contract tracing isn't going to be the way it is because of how quickly Omicron spreads. So that's something we're still waiting for, to hear how we will be informed. Other than that, I think I can't actually see to move down. So, well, thank you. We did discuss childcare, that's right. And our workers are also essential workers. So we were encouraging that their children could go to school. And is this an appropriate time to ask, did we have many children attend school on Monday? Tuesday.
It varies across the board today, but overall we were looking at approximately 5 to 10 students per secondary school. And then, of course, across the elementary, it varied really smaller in numbers, but overall. But I also think that the weather contributed to lesser numbers than maybe we will have tomorrow. So we'll be monitoring it all week long.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments by trustees on the minutes? Trustee Croft?
It's not specifically, it's just the general on the topic itself. Is it fair to say that in many instances we're returning to practices with which we are familiar? Are we having to invent many new practices?
Superintendent?
I could say that many of them are familiar because I think during a particular time when we had cohorts, which is not what we're doing right now, but it's going back to some of those similar practices around how do you exit children, how do you enter children, how do you make sure that there's no bottlenecks, that kids are able to stay 6 feet apart, how do you restructure your classroom. So all of that will be happening at the school site, because each one of them is in a different context. But you're absolutely right. It is really reinstating some of those quality good practices that we had in a different time, not so long ago.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a motion to receive the minutes, trustee Kemler, or trustee DeGroot, motion to receive and seconded by trustee Kemler. Any debate on the motion? All those in favor? Motion carries. Moving to upcoming meetings and events. Secretary Treasurer, could you post that for us, please?
Yes. Okay.
So anything that anyone wishes to comment on? Okay, moving on then. No correspondence, no new business. Question period. Do we have an audience, Secretary Treasurer?
Yeah, right. Currently, our audience is CUPE, the Cowichan Valley Teachers Union, and the Cowichan Teachers Association. So we can give them a moment to see if they have any questions that they'd like to put in the Q&A. Oh, I see a hand up. So I think there will be one from Cowichan Valley Teachers Union. And Naomi, I'd ask if you could type that. I don't think we can bring you into the meeting. Just waiting.
Superintendent?
Sorry about that. I just got a text that the chat has been disabled, so she's not able to put that
Oh.
in
Question and answer, please.
in the question and answer.
Yes. I disabled the chat.
Thank you.
Trustee Hutchins?
Is Jason able to erase that chat?
I tried. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Or is it easier just, actually, I think we could promote her in if that's easier.
It might be easier, faster.
We do have the question here though.
There.
Oh, okay.
So it says, thank you. Early learning plan presentation mentioned that there would be plans developed for partners in terms of learning. There's probably a bit more here. Might just be easier if I just promote her in.
There we go.
That's
Here she
okay.
comes.
There she comes. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so sorry. Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful evening. It just mentioned that in the early learning plan presentation that there was going to be some sort of professional learning plan for partners. And I'm just wondering how that's going to dovetail. Was that meant for teachers as well, and how that would work with our own professional development and our collective agreement and our professional autonomy? So I'm just wondering if there was an elaboration on that. And thanks for letting me in.
Thanks, Naomi, and I hope you're having a great evening as well.
Yeah.
What the plan does is try to provide professional learning to everyone on the area of early learning. And so I don't know that any of those details would be worked out yet, but I do know that our superintendent and others would be working with the union to make sure that we're doing it in a way that meets our collective agreement and still satisfies that professional development need. So not to worry, it's a plan that's in development. Does that give you enough information at this point?
Oh, I'm still here. Yes, absolutely. Perfectly. Just wanted to make sure we were in the loop. Thanks, Candace.
Absolutely, Naomi. Thank you. Are there any other questions, Mr. Sandquist?
Nobody else has their hand up. So I think that's it.
Okay, well, we can certainly say we're off to a happy new year, and let's hope it continues for us. So have a great evening, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Oops, I think you need a motion to adjourn.
Peace.
Sorry.
Moved by trustee DeGroot, seconded by trustee Kemmler. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.